as opposed to extrinsic motivation, motivation based on obvious external rewards, obligations, or similar factors. Now, I think that probably everyone would agree that the best type of motivation is intrinsic motivation. When people are motivated based on something from within. But unfortunately, for societal purposes, many times we have to motivate people from using extrinsic motivation. For instance, if you read a book for your own pleasure, that motivation to read the book would be intrinsic motivation. If you read a book to get a grade in school, that motivation would be extrinsic motivation. Obviously, it would be much better if all motivation was intrinsic, but in order to move people based on societal needs, then that's why we resort to, as a society, to extrinsic motivation, as also in individuals. Parents use a lot of extrinsic motivation. Interpersonal relationship, we use those too, and sometimes they're necessary. Shifting gears on page 341, something we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about, but a very, very important aspect of our psychological makeup, and these are emotions. And you can see on page 341 the definition of emotion: a state characterized by physiological arousal, changes in facial expression, gestures, posture, and subjective feelings. We all know that these emotions that we have are very important to us, and they're what's called a construct. It's something that we know exists, but it's something that's really hard to sort of conceptualize into something sort of hard and concrete. It's something that we experience, and we know what it is, but you couldn't sort of draw an emotion. You couldn't sort of picture an emotion, take a picture of an emotion. What you see are the results of the emotion, but emotions are very, very important aspects of our human being. The amygdala on page 343. We know that one very important emotion is controlled by a specific area of the brain, the amygdala. Now, the amygdala has to do with some other emotions too. The book tends to focus on the emotion of fear. But the amygdala is a very, very important area of the brain. And it does influence the very strong emotion of fear. And we talked about earlier when we were talking about the nervous system that we can actually stimulate through using a microelectrode various areas of the brain. We found that through the use of microelectrodes, we can stimulate this amygdala area and manipulate the fear level of animals. Now, obviously, we wouldn't want to do this with humans for because of humane considerations, but the amygdala, through research, we found that the amygdala is a very important area of the brain associated with a very strong emotion of fear. The polygraph, I think most of you know that the polygraph is referred to as the lie detector test, but it really isn't a lie detector test. It is an emotion detector test. It is based on the premise that if a person tells a lie, they're going to demonstrate an emotional change. And this is why it's not acceptable in court, and this is why it's not legally, there's legal sort of restrictions on how it can be used for other purposes such as human resource issues and so on and so forth. Because it is an emotion detector, it's not a lie detector, and some people can tell a lie, not be emotional. Some people can get emotional even if they're not telling a lie, so it's not a foolproof device. But as I said earlier in the semester, now that we understand brains, have brain scans and PET scans and other devices, electroencephalograph, we're getting closer to a true lie detector test where we can actually see the changes in the brain. Once we get to that point, then we will be able to truly say we have a lie detector test. But now the polygraph is just an emotion detector test. For test purposes, leave out facial feedback hypothesis. On page 353, there is a term emotional intelligence, there is a psychologist, Goldman, who has done a lot of work in the area of emotional intelligence. What he contends is that we put so much emphasis on IQ, intelligence quotient, but sometimes people can be very intelligent, but if they don't have good EQ, emotional quotient, then their lives are not going to be as productive and happy as they might have been otherwise. For instance, a physician, a brilliant medical student who has the highest IQ in the class might not be the best physician because he doesn't have good EQ. He doesn't have good bedside manner. He doesn't sort of understand his patient's emotions, and his emotions might offend his patients. So there's a lot more emphasis now, not only academically, but also in the human resource world, in other sort of areas of life, where we're paying much more attention to the importance of emotions and how those emotions influence our interactions with other people. Okay, let's move on to the questions. And the first question is distinguish the following types of motivation: biological, stimulus, and learned. And here I asked you to come up with some situations that illustrate each type. The biological type of motivation I referred to earlier is the easiest to explain. A good illustration of this is, it's about 10 after 10 now, but and I'm going to play some tennis this afternoon. So about 12:30, I'm going to begin to develop a hunger drive, and I'm going to try to satisfy that hunger drive before I go play tennis. My motivation to get something to eat is based on a biological need. So biological motivation is that drive, that motivation to satisfy that biological need, that need to sort of maintain homeostasis that sustains our life. And this is a very powerful type of motivation. A person gets thrown in a swimming pool, they're underwater. Very quickly they develop biological motivation. They have motivation to get to the top, to get air. Now this is not the only type of motivation. Another type of motivation is stimulus motivation. And in our modern world, stimulus motivation has become increasingly important. And stimulus motivation, and again, the book sort of gives a circular definition. It says stimulus motivation is the need to stay stimulated. Well, what does that mean? It's the need to keep our brain active, to keep those mental processes going, that need to have information coming in. Now, there is a very obvious illustration of the strength of stimulus motivation now with people attached to their cell phones. Why are you so motivated to use your cell phone? To get that information, to keep your brain sort of stimulated, keep that information coming into your brain. The motivation to go to a movie, the motivation to read a book. This is stimulus motivation, that motivation to get information, to keep those processes in the brain going. Then learn motivation. Again, don't use a circular definition to say, well, learn motivation is based on learning. What I'd like for you to recognize is learn motivation is that motivation that we get through our interaction with our society. That motivation, once society sets up certain rewards, that sort of recognizes us when we achieve, that's the type of learned motivation. Now, obviously, you're not here today. Hopefully, you're doing something really fun and sort of soaking in some rays maybe while you're watching this video on your smartphone, and sort of getting some stimulus motivation. But also, the reason that you're in college, the motivation, probably has a lot to do with learned motivation. society has set up this thing of getting a college degree. And you've learned that people who get a college degree usually have a better life than people who don't get a college degree. So you are motivated to achieve that particular reward that society sets up. So learned motivation, that motivation that's based on the learning that we have, that in society there are certain levels of achievement, there are certain rewards that we aspire to. I'm married, okay? One of the motivations for getting married is that society sort of encourages people to get married. So this is a type of learned motivation. We have learned in society that society sort of expects us to get married. Now, obviously, there are other reasons for getting married. Love, we could sort of look at it more from a biological, perhaps, perspective. But there is an expectation in society for people to get married. So that does influence our decision. So we would say that aspect of sort of selecting and finding a mate would be based on learnings. And you could go on and on and on. I've got some athletes in the class. What is your motivation for going through those torturous sort of drills sometimes that athletes are asked to go through? I can remember myself, I wish I had a nickel for every wind sprint that I ran. And why do you do that? To make the team. You have learned, in order to make the team, you have to engage in certain activities. So the motivation then would be learned motivation. Okay, let's move on to, we said we leave out number 2. Let's move on to number 3. And let me just take a minute here to put back on the overhead the diagram that illustrates number 3 on page 335. And this is something that, to me, is very important from a lot of perspectives. I did a little research on the Yerkes-Dodson law because one of my interests over the years has been sports. And this Yerkes-Dodson law, this inverted U sort of relationship that we're looking at in question number 3, is in many ways the basis of what is referred to as sports psychology, a course that I've taught in the past and really enjoyed teaching. And central to this idea of sports psychology, and central to a lot of the activities in which coaches and athletes engage in, is related to this inverted relationship that we see between arousal and performance. Now, we're not going to worry about simple tasks and complex tasks. For test purposes, I'd simply like for you to know what we basically mean by the inverted U function. And I really think you could think through this without even reading the textbook. But you can see here, we have arousal level, or we could say, level of motivation.